Okay, so let's talk about the background of this band. Chvrches are from Glasgow, Scotland, and this story kind of weaves through all of the Glasgow music scene of the early 2000s. And in case you don't know, there are actually quite a lot of bands you might know that started in Glasgow for it being a relatively small city, only about 500,000 people. A lot of bands have come out of there. Bands like Bell and Sebastian, Franz Ferdinand, Camera Obscura, The Blue Nile, Mogwai, Primal Scream, The Vaselines, and my favorite, Delamitri, who scored a hit in the US in the
Look
90s.
around the
Dude,
world, pretty big.
that we
Whoa.
could do an entire episode on that song. There's a stacked harmony in the pre-chorus that's just anyway, sorry.
I hope that's the song you're referring to that I just started
Yes,
singing.
it is.
Because it would be really
Absolutely.
funny if it wasn't.
Top perfection. It's like a minute 58 seconds long. All right, sorry, Rob.
No, so that's the reaction I wanted to get because I didn't know he was Scottish or that band was Scottish. I don't even know if it's a person or a band, to be honest. The point is, Glasgow is a hoppin' musical scene and has been really for decades. But our story with Chvrches starts back in the early 2000s when a guy called Ian Cook meets a fella called Martin Doherty at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. Some places seem to say they were both students, both studying music. That seems plausible, but I also read that this guy Martin Doherty was a student in a class where Ian Cook was lecturing, and he wore a PJ Harvey shirt to class, and that prompted a conversation. They got to talking. Now I should mention that there's kind of a big age difference. Ian Cook is 8 years older than Martin Doherty, so that story kind of makes a little more sense. But maybe he was a TA. I'm not sure. Either way, they met at university.
He was buying him beer.
He was buying him beer, exactly. This is way back in 2003. Doherty is 19. Oh, I think the legal drinking age in Scotland is probably 11.
It's 12.
10.
Yeah, I was going to say right.
Doherty's 19, and he's in a band at the time called Julia 13. And he asks Cook, Ian Cook, who's the elder person, to help produce their EP. They're an inexperienced band. They don't know anything about recording. They couldn't afford microphones or studio time. And by the way, I listened to some of it. They sound a bit like Ben's era Radiohead, which is to say guitar-driven rock music with whiny male vocals. Now, that's kind of how they connect initially. Ian Cook helps them record that EP. The band breaks up shortly after, doesn't really go anywhere, but they've met, they've connected. This guy, Ian Cook, he's also in a band, a much more established one at the time. He's the guitar player in this band called Aerogram, and they actually released 4 full-length albums and do pretty well by most metrics. And by the way, they sound like noisy, shoegazy, guitar-driven indie rock with whiny male vocals.
I see a theme here.
There's a theme developing, right? This is early 2000s Glasgow. Aerogram had a fair amount of success. They toured America a few times. They had some buzz back around this time, 2003, right around when these two were meeting up. And unfortunately, they released these records. They never quite fully caught on or took off by the time they made it back to tour America again. In 2007, they had hired this younger guy, Martin. These are both members of Chvrches, but they haven't formed Chvrches yet. They hired him as a touring keyboard player, but unfortunately they played to much smaller crowds, and basically the band was in the midst of breaking up. So this was sort of the genesis of their collaboration. They meet in 2003, they start collaborating when the younger guy gets hired as a touring keyboard player in 2007, and all their bands at this point are kind of broken up. Now, as a side note, with a small personal connection and, surprisingly, a callback already earlier in the episode, after Aerogram breaks up in 2007, Martin Doherty gets hired in a similar hired gun for touring only role in a band called the Twilight Sad, another Scottish band. And he claims that the wildest, most debaucherous time of his life was touring America with them and yet another Scottish band. Now, stay with me here. That band
Okay.
was called Frightened Rabbit. And they were riding some indie buzz from their record, Midnight Oregon Flight. And I bring this up because...
Yep.
Phil?
Yeah, my boy Nick Krill was in the Spinto band. Who was on tour with Frightened Rabbit, probably right around the same time, maybe a little earlier than that, 2008-ish.
2008.
Yeah.
Same time. And we played with them. Phil's missing the biggest part. We played with those two bands.
Leave that to you.
Dude, that's crazy.
Yeah.
We
So
played with them.
basically shared a stage with the guy from the band tonight.
Well, I know it's sort of a 6 degrees of separation thing. My point is that apparently in the midst of these most debaucherous Scottish guys on tour, Frightened Rabbit seems to have cordoned themselves off, played a smaller scale show with the likes of us, the Chop, and our friends in the Spinto Band, who were already referenced because one of their lead singers, Nick Krill, is a good friend of Phil's, and he now has a band called Teen Men that Phil referenced earlier in the episode. So check all those bands out. Anyway,
that's cool.
Thought that was kind of fun that we caught them somewhere in the middle. I'm sure we did not keep up with the Scottish drinking that was going on otherwise.
Ooh, that'd be a tough order to keep.
But okay, so
challenge accepted.
This guy Martin Doherty, he's touring with these other bands. He's getting work as a musician. He's in his early 20s, and at some point he just realizes that playing someone else's songs is inherently less interesting than playing one's own. You get it, right? Okay, but back to Ian Cook for a second. Picture, you were in a band. You got signed by a successive handful of indie labels. They kind of switch labels for each of their 4 full-length releases. You tour all through America a couple times on their dime. This is more success by several miles than one could realistically dream of as a young musician.
Sure.
What I'm trying to get across here is that was your shot. When Aerogram breaks up, Ian Cook is in his early 30s. And he's like, that was it. I tried. It almost worked, or really it did work, but now it's over with. So I'm just going to hang around Glasgow and I'm going to produce other bands.
I thought you were going to say get a job at Guitar Center, which is another potential option.
He's done the smart. This is the intelligent musician's retirement plan, which is he's been setting up his home studio the entire time. He's been learning about engineering.
Yeah.
Our friend Nick Krill has taken a similar path, we should point out. And anyway, he does that for a few years, helping out local bands because it is a rich scene. And in 2011, a band called Blue Sky Archives asked him for help with their record. And they are yet another guitar-driven Scottish indie rock band.
Crowded scene, man. Crowded scene. Woo.
I know, except this band has a female vocalist called Lauren Mayberry. Now, you might be noticing that in this thriving Glasgow scene of the early 2010s, there aren't really many synth-led projects. Everything is guitars, fuzzy guitars, washed-out guitars, shoegazy guitars, more or less. So when these guys get together, they're really trying to play against that in a very direct way. And I just think that's important context for what we're listening to here. Now, Lauren Mayberry has kind of an interesting backstory as well. She earned a 4-year law degree and a separate journalism degree and had been working already for a few years as a music journalist and having some success with it, interviewing people like The Strokes and Kelly Rowland from Destiny's Child for a local music magazine in Glasgow while moonlighting in this band that ultimately goes to Ian Cook's home studio for help, right? Now, side note, that background of hers probably came in handy later because Chvrches basically blew up because of a hipster music blog.
Nice work.
Okay. As a journalism major, I feel way inferior now that she also added a law degree and a singing career on top of that. So well done.
Now, being in your 20s is great. Having like a kind of a job and then moonlighting as a rock star at night, or even just playing music at night. Oh,
do you want to just pop that Billy Crystal monologue in here? We could just segue right to City Slickers. Kids, this is the best time of your life.
Oh, God.
You know what I'm saying?
Cherish it. That's where they go.
Such an old man. Jesus. Anyway, sorry.
So all this time, though, Ian Cook and Martin Doherty have stayed friends, and they've been looking for something to do together. And they're relatively early in the process of making these synth-led demos. And after Cook has this chance meeting with Lauren Mayberry, they invite her over to sing on the demos. And as they tell it, they get together one evening at the house to try some vocals. And the three of them click instantly, and the band Chvrches is born of that trio. They never consider adding someone else. That's it. It cements right then and there. And by the way, I mentioned earlier the name Chvrches. It's not a religious thing at all. I mean, it's Chvrches with a V, which is supposed to help them in terms of Googling, but the reality is Google autocorrects to the other
Chvrches.
word, which is much more common.
Well, the V thing always threw me off because I hadn't really heard their music before. I think I may have and not known it, but when I have come across the Chvrches with a V stylized that way, I just assumed it was some kind of goth band. Is that like a normal sort of gothy
Yeah,
kind of
I
thing,
think I'm with you. There was something about the spelling that made me think that they were.
like dark
Terrible.
and sinister or
Yeah,
something
yeah.
terrible.
Yes. So, no, you're not wrong. So the name is just supposed to be something that's powerful, that it has a lot of visual ideas around it. And the replaced V is a deliberate aid to making it not only searchable on Google, but also for their visual aesthetic, which really leans into these 45-degree angles that the V implies. But to your point, I also read that that V is a subtle nod to a micro genre of electronic music known as witch house, which you,
Good, good. I'm glad we're here now.
which is a
Actually-
Wikipedia page I visited this week, which uses a lot of occult symbols like triangles or some such nonsense. So you're not wrong. The triangle is used in druid rituals.
All right, you're slowly winning me over here. I think
Yeah,
we're,
totally.
I think
I'm
we're making
already
some
on the
hay.
witch house. Can we talk about witch house a little more?
That's a spin-off episode.
I couldn't bring myself to actually listen to anything in that genre, but yeah, I like the name of the genre. So another interesting detail, we already mentioned it, right? But this is their first foray themselves into synth-based music. They each have all these indie rock credentials. They're all individually guitar and keyboard players, and they don't have specific experience making music of this type at all. And even they all say, like, hey, most of the stuff we like is guitar-based rock. This was just a lark, basically.
That's crazy. And then it worked really well.
Well, the production level is pretty fantastic, given what you're saying here.
Mm-hmm.
I did have to laugh when I looked at the personnel on the album, just like the Spinal Tap thing where they're playing that bass song and all of them are playing bass. If you look at the credits on Wikipedia, it's like 4 guys doing Pro Tools. Pro Tools to Bob Smith and on Pro Tools #2.
So I read that initially their thinking was that Lauren would provide background vocals or sort of a counterpoint to Martin's vocals, a la Jenny Lewis and Ben Gibbard in the band The Postal Service, which you might know, another kind of electro pop band.
And I kind of see that line as definitely was a musical thread. I think I felt.
Yeah, and for the record, I actually think the Postal Service record is really, really good. I have listened to that semi-recently. It's a fun. I can't quite remember what the album's called. Give Up, maybe. But after a little bit of recording, Martin Doherty, or maybe it was Ian Cook. Sorry, I could be mixing it up. One of the men was singing as well. But then they basically just muted their own vocals on the playback and understood immediately that it was the right move to make Lauren Mayberry the lead.
She is the lead, right?
Good
That's cool.
call. So
Yeah.
what happens next is really truly an early 2010s kind of story. They finish their very first song called Lies, and they submit it to a synth poppy hipster music blog that was around at the time called Neon Gold. This is in 2012. At the time, they're just thinking, hey, this is a studio project, maybe even just a one-off track, but it takes off all of a sudden. They're suddenly being hailed as a Scottish supergroup and getting passed around the internet. Now, I should probably mention kids and boomers too. Weirdly, both groups will not understand this. I think we're uniquely positioned, maybe age-wise, to understand what I'm about to say. You may not remember, but there was about a 10-year period where hipster music blogs were the way to get your music heard.
It is true. It is
in
true.
days long after mainstream radio airplay or even MTV airplay, but before Spotify editorial playlists. You had these indie blogs that had so much power in shaping the cultural music taste, at least for a subset.
It was in the heyday of Pandora on desktop and 99-cent iTunes single downloads.
Well, and then you had these blogs that turned into more of, they would host perform, like, like the Day Trotter sessions and things like that. Like there was, I found out about a lot of bands back in the day from those channels, but you had to be really in it though, or you had to have people sharing stuff because it was just such a vast.
You couldn't find it, right?
That's a great point. And we already referenced Tiny Desk Concert, which is in a way the last remaining vestige of something like that, even though it's run by NPR, a huge organization. But you're right, Day Trotter was big, Blogotech, the French version was big. Anyway, there were a lot of these.
It's really funny. It's really funny to hear that Lies was the first track, because I marked that as my least favorite, my low point on the album, because it's just monotonous and boring. Sounds like a Gary Newman song. Honestly, it sounds like Our Friends Electric from that early Gary Newman stuff. I was like, wait, so.
I also think it's one of the worst songs on the final product, but I wanted to play it and so I didn't include it on our focus list because I don't think I neither think it's a highlight nor the true low light, so that's why I didn't put it on the list of songs we're going to talk about. But so I am also genuinely surprised that particular track got them as far as it did. But that's why I played it at the top, because it was so important to their career.
Sure.
So the song does really well off of that one blog post. It starts getting posted and repped by other blogs like The Hype Machine was one of the big ones back then. And it starts getting some airplay on BBC Radio and on SoundCloud, which is still around, obviously, but it was sort of just starting then.
Yeah.
At this point, the band's never played a show, never really even thought about playing a show.
Jeez.
They haven't planned for that at all. They did not plan for the success. Ian said in an interview that the response was frankly unbelievable and that they weren't all that committed to the band at that point, just messing around.
That's great.
But it takes off. What are you going to do, right? Who knew? And
well, I think there's something to be said for when you have, not that when your guard is down, but when you're not coming in with defined expectations and you can kind of throw whatever you want together. There's probably a freeness about that probably cultivates something that,
Absolutely.
people might gravitate towards.
So we're going to start our synth pop side project later tonight.
Well, we're gonna have to look past synth pop, guys. We're gonna have to look to the edge of
synth metal.
Yeah, I don't know.
Witch House.
Yeah. There we go.
Witch House is wide open.
Yeah, agreed. I will bring the projector. If you could bring the Twin Peaks footage.
I'll bring the pointy hats.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I've been looking to join a cult for years. So.
It's your chance to start one.
Either way.
Exactly.
Yeah, don't join one. Come on, man. Be original.
So, with all this buzz, I want to say too, but this is one of the reasons that they endeared themselves to me, is learning this, especially for a guy like Ian Cook, who's now, by the time this record comes out, he's kind of in his late 30s, and it's a total surprise to him. So I thought that was cool.
A second chance, yeah.
So they get all this buzz, and there's pressure for them to play shows, and they're nervous. So what do they do about it? They decide that before, well, they're Scottish, so of course they drink. They decide that before they go play a show for a bunch of A&R people, they need a couple practice gigs. So they book a couple nights at a local art school, calling themselves Shark Week to avoid any press. So those are their first couple gigs, but
how'd those go?
No one important attends. Well, I guess they were good warm-ups, because then they play, they get lots of label attention, and perhaps unsurprisingly, most of the press wants to focus on Lauren Mayberry, the young female lead singer, to put her front and center, to promote her as the leader of the band. But the band was really against this concept and strongly pushed for equality, including, of course, Lauren was pushing for this. They wanted to maintain their status as a true band, as a trio. I'm making this point because selling the band as led by a beautiful young woman clearly would have been a bit easier to do, but they very actively chose not to do that. And I'm including stuff like only being photographed all together and sort of with equal weight in the photograph, stuff like that.
Wow. Okay.
And these are the kinds of subtle, whether you realize it or not, these are the kinds of subtle things that the press and photographers are always kind of trying to do. I'm sure it's been in a few movies about bands where it's like, oh, just have them step away. We'll just get the lead singer here, that kind of thing. And it not only creates tension within the band, but it creates, I don't know, a weird image for the fans.
Well, yeah. There's a feeling that like you're just part of the product, right? Because I know from experience.
Being a hot young sexy
Phil's usually the eye candy.
Yeah, right.
You have to. Yeah.
Well, I mean, in all of my smashingly successful musical projects, I was obviously the eye candy.
Obviously.
Yeah, I think it can be unfair it could have been unfair to her too, where there could be assumptions that she's the band leader, that it could put a certain amount of pressure on her that wasn't good for anybody. And, I think it's kind of, I don't know, No Doubt's backstory, but I think there was a little bit of that there where they were a band really.
Absolutely.
And then clearly for obvious reasons, everyone gravitated towards her and, she did it up, but yeah,
And
I can see that.
and I want to compliment her in particular because from reading interviews, listening to her speak about this time in particular, she's the youngest member of the group. It takes a certain level of egolessness or selflessness to push away from that, right? I totally, in other words, I totally understand why someone like Gwen Stefani decided to lean into it for the betterment of getting her band press, getting their songs heard, and perhaps even some element of ego or selfishness mixed in there too. But that is totally understandable, to be honest. But it seems like Lauren Mayberry from the jump was like, nope, that's not how I want to do it. I don't want to be that. I don't want to be a pop star in that way. I want to be a part of this band that's an indie band, right? So luckily they had some other demos in work, done or mostly done when this thing took off. And later that year they released some more singles, eventually an EP, while going out on tour, kind of to give fans a holdover until this album, their debut, which is called The Bones of What You Believe, dropped in September of 2013. So that is around 14 months after their song initially went viral on the blog. So they did pour over it in terms of the hours spent. But speaking of hours spent, that brings us to our favorite segment of the podcast, By the Numbers. Okay, the first number I want to throw out at you guys is 13. I have already alluded to it, but that is the age difference in years between the oldest and youngest member of this band. Ian Cook is significantly older than the other two, and at the time the Chvrches record releases, he's 38, as I think I mentioned, while Lauren Mayberry is 25.
Wow.
Look, the older we get, the less that matters, but it matters a lot when you're 25.
It definitely matters.
Sure.
It matters. And I remember being in bands in my early 20s, and I remember one band specifically, there was a guy who was a solid like 4 years younger than everybody else. Like he was basically still a teenager and everyone else was, 23, 24. And even that, there was a big gulf just in what you could depend on, what you could expect behaviorally. Like that is definitely a big difference when you're trying to work on something very specific with other people.
Absolutely.
I think Spirit has them beat though. What was that guy, Ed Cassidy, the drummer, was like 50 and the guitar player was like 17 or something.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Right. Hilarious. So next number I want to throw out to you is 11. That's the number of major music publications that put this in their best of 2013 list, put it in the best albums of 2013 list. I'm talking Rolling Stone, Pitchfork, Stereo Gum, NME, AV Club, and Paste magazine, among others.
Damn.
Tough year for music. Damn.
That said, about 300,000 is the number of certified sales across the US and UK for this record, which, as we know, compared to records of old, is really not that many. But of course, we're in the era where people don't really buy music anymore. So the last number for you is 180 million. That's the streams for the lead single off this record, sitting on Spotify right now. It has been a success, certainly by modern metrics, even though the album sales aren't there. Now, that said, we did hear via our text thread that Marty opened for these guys not too long ago, so take it all with a grain of salt.
That.
Wait. And he bailed out on this?
I don't know what to tell you, but that's what Marty said. He said he played in front of them at a street fair. Maybe he played at 1 p.m. and they played at 11 p.m. I'm not sure.
Maybe they were just walking by as he was playing like the kids stage or something
I was
that.
thinking he was maybe more like playing hacky sack at the Chvrches show.
It was the after party in his basement for that whatever festival that was.
Yeah, Marty will have to come on and defend that.
Yes.
That anecdote. But in any case, speaking of millions upon millions of streams, 1001 Album Claims isn't quite there yet, but we're climbing that hill. We're making headway. every
Yeah.
single week. And that is thanks to you, dear audience. So thank you. Sincerely, we thank you. We get so excited to see the numbers go up each week, to hear from you and all the emails, the YouTube comments on Instagram. It really does mean a lot to us. So please know that just you listening to this forever free weekly show is supporting us and the hard work that all the boyos here are putting in week over week. Now, that said, if you're looking for other ways to support us, there are many great options. You can leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. You can tell a friend about our show, a fellow complainer, or you can join our Patreon, even just at the completely free level. That's right, you can join totally for free. You can sign on there. We can communicate more with you there. We're excited to start doing more listener request voting stuff and more advanced album commentary, soliciting some of those tweets before we do the show over on the free feed of the Patreon. Now, that's in addition to the cool bonus shows we're doing at the $5 a month tier, like Song Battle. So, point is, help us out any way you're able to. We love you for it. Okay, with that background context out of the way, shall we talk about some of these songs, gents?
Dude, let's get
Sure,
into it.
yeah.
I am pumped.